Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am delighted to be joined by Nesreen Ahmed today. Welcome, Nesreen.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So good to have you here. And Nesreen is the founder and CEO of Harbour Light Coaching. You are a highly accredited coach and also a grief recovery specialist. And more recently, you've been certified by David Kessler in his Grief Educator program, which is kind of how we met. So we are in good hands today to hear more about grief and hope and all other things. So Nesreen, perhaps you could begin by telling everybody how you ended up in this space, in the grief space.
Yeah, I have shared my story again and again, and emotion never seems to fully fade. You know what I mean? Even though I've done all the work and I've spent years getting supported and working through my grief, but my sister passed away suddenly at the end of 2013, and it was just the most devastating thing I've ever been through. She was my older sister. So I have two sisters. She was the middle sister, and she was the one that I looked up to, and I wanted to just be exactly like her. And I used to, steal her clothes and try to copy everything she did. And I spent years working in professional theater. I worked backstage as a costumer, and I got into theater because of her, because of my sister. She was a stage manager and helped me get my first internship at a summer stock theater in Virginia. And that kind of just snowballed when I went to college into doing more and more theater work. And so my very first career was in theater because of her. And then after she passed away, I spent years trying to figure out what I needed in terms of grief support, in terms of how to just be able to get up out of bed every day, how to be able to handle the trauma and the loss that I experienced, and also eventually, after working with, going to support groups, working with therapists, doing a lot of sort of traditional things, I kind of ventured out into less traditional grief support or grief healing, and eventually worked with a grief coach and found the process so insanely helpful that I decided to get. I was already working or working towards training and certification as a life coach, but I decided to go into grief coaching specifically. And so I really think that she also, helped me find my second career and my passion and my purpose and all the things that that fill me up, in my professional life.
Thank you so much for that. And we share the similarity, or that we're both the youngest of three girls. Yeah. And my sisters are so dear to me. So my heart really goes out to you, and how hard that must have been. And I haven't spoken to anybody, actually, I haven't interviewed anybody specifically on sibling loss. So how could you speak to that a little bit, about how that was to lose a sibling? Because I know that sometimes people say, most people focus on the parents and how they're doing, and sometimes the siblings get left behind. So how was that? What was your experience as a sibling?
And even in thinking about this morning, thinking about this interview today, I realized I'm older than my sister ever was, and you never, especially as a child growing up, you never think you're going to outlive one of your older siblings, And it's heartbreaking, it's heartbreaking. And I am lucky in the sense that I had a lot of people checking in on me specifically. They didn't forget about me necessarily, but I did have a lot of people who would start the conversation with like, how are your parents doing? What's going on with your parents? So there were a number of people that, even though they didn't, forget me, I wasn't the first person they were asking about. And there was I understood, but there was a certain amount of pain to that as well, almost, it almost felt, a bit insulting, as if my pain wouldn't be as great or wouldn't be, important enough to ask about. So I think that's something that's really missing from the world of grief in general, is the focus on siblings and the understanding that it's not something that you expect that you lose a sibling. Of course, any loss is awful and is difficult, and we should never compare losses. But it's hard to have the experience of your pain being kind of secondary, or even just in simple question, like starting a conversation with like, how are your parents doing? How are they holding up? It does sort of put my grief off to the side. So yeah, but I did have a lot of people who were very kind and compassionate and did focus on me. I was the first person they would ask about. So I had both experiences, and I think I'm lucky in that respect.
And you said that you had therapy for a while, and but it was really when you had a specific sort of specialist in the grief area that things started to shift for you. So perhaps you could talk about why you felt like the therapy didn't really kind of help. And what was it about I know you did say a little bit about the coaching, but perhaps you could just share a bit more on that. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, so so prior to losing my sister, I had been in therapy before, and I had a number of people tell me, oh, you should talk to a therapist. Like that was just sort of the automatic when I lost my sister. That was the automatic expectation. So I went back to therapy and saw a new therapist, but not somebody who was actually trained in grief. I didn't realize that not all therapists were trained in grief, and I didn't realize that there were many more modalities to get healing when you're grieving. So I didn't really think about a grief counselor. I had never heard of grief coaching at that point. So I just automatically went back to therapy, and it wasn't a good choice for me. I mean, the therapist was wonderful, but A, she wasn't trained in grief, and B, it wasn't actually what I needed, because I felt like I was going in every week and I was spending a lot of time, sharing about my grief and crying and feeling awful. And then having to leave her office, get on the subway, go home, and continue to feel awful. Like there wasn't any sort of reprieve or a respite, from my grief. And I didn't find that just talking about it was helping. In some ways it felt like it was making it harder and worse, to have to go into her office every week. And so, but I didn't know what else to do, and at that point I had invested enough time and energy in trying to find a new therapist, and all the logistical things with the insurance and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And so I was just sort of committed to going. But it felt too hard, it felt too hard to try to find somebody else at that point, because it hurt too much to talk about my story and to tell it to a new stranger, and to open up all of that grief again. It felt too overwhelming. So I just sort of persisted with therapy for a while, and then finally was like, okay, I'm done. This is not helping. This is clearly not helping. It's been a while. I'm not getting any real relief. So I'm gonna stop. And I had been simultaneously going to support groups for a while. They met twice a month. And kind of the same thing. I felt like we would go in, maybe like, I remember one day there was like a collage, we would like make a collage or almost like a vision board, in memory of our person that There was another day where like you brought in pictures, so there were some very nice exercises. But I do also remember being like, how is this helping me heal? How is this, where are the tools that I'm acquiring to be able to go through this, to be able to live with this, and it didn't feel like the things that they were doing were, it didn't feel like the things that they were doing were really in support of building these new tools and muscles that I needed. And so for a while, I just stopped doing anything. I wasn't seeing anyone. I wasn't even, at that point, I wasn't even dealing with my grief. I just sort of like put in a box and tried to get on with the rest of my life and tried to figure out what I wanted to do career-wise. That's when I looked into life coaching and started getting trained and just started trying to figure out, how to live without dealing with the grief, without really processing it in a effective enough manner. And so fast forward to being in the coach training program. It was a year-long program. And in month 4, I shared with the group, that I was still really struggling with the loss of my sister and had not been able to get the kind of support I was looking for, and just sort of stopped trying to get support altogether. But I definitely needed it. And somebody in the group mentioned that she had just met a grief coach and would I be interested in talking to her? And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that existed. I mean, like you always hear about either therapy, support groups, or counseling, right? I think those are the 3 options for you. And so I got excited and nervous. I was a bit scared, and it took me a while to actually call up the coach. But she was trained in the grief recovery method, and just working through that process was so incredibly valuable. What I loved about it was very specific, and it gave me something to do from week to week. I think that was a lot of what felt like it was missing for me. Like I wanted to do something with all this energy. I wanted to do something with all this emotion, and just talking about it wasn't enough. And so being able to read, being able to do the writing, to do the exercises, and then to talk about it with my coach, that felt more proactive, and it felt like, okay, now I have something to do with all this pain. I have a process, that hopefully will help me, and I think there's a bit of magic within the process itself, because I never imagined that I would feel so at peace. I never imagined that I could stop feeling guilty. Like I should have done more in my relationship with my sister, that, we spent years kind of in and out of relationship. And I felt so awful about that. I felt so guilty about the time that I wasted, or the things that I was upset with her about that just felt, so minuscule after she died, and so I spent so much time beating myself up, and I never imagined that I could let go of that grief. I never imagined I could let go of the pain that I was in, and it was really just powerful to be able to work through a lot of that, and to be able to learn how to forgive myself, and learn how to accept that I'm human, and I didn't know everything, and I didn't see everything, and yes, I could have been more compassionate at times. And I realized there were quite a number of times where I did offer compassion and grace, and, inviting her into a safe relationship, whether or not she always chose to accept that invitation was on her, but I got to see a little bit more and feel a little bit more of how things actually went. And that in itself was very helpful. But to really be able to say, I'm human, I make mistakes. And at the end of the day, I know that she knew I loved her, and I know that she loved me.
Mm. And I love that you're talking about the grief recovery method. For some people who may not be familiar with this organization, perhaps you could explain about who they are, where they are, what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually it was created by two men. I want to say like way back in like the 70s or 80s. Yeah, so the grief recovery method was actually created by two men, John James and Russell Friedman. And I can't say exactly when they started it, but it is basically that they over time wrote this book, the Grief Recovery Handbook, and it has become basically like a step-by-step process that you can use to work through your grief. And the way that I describe it to potential clients is basically, we start out talking about sort of grief in general. There's a lot of reading involved and writing involved, but we start off for sort of general grief, like what it is that you're experiencing, some of the cliches and unhelpful comments that people make, like time heals all, or be grateful that blah blah blah, or at least you blah blah blah, and how you handle them, right? What have you experienced in terms of those comments, and then how do you respond to them? How do you handle them? And then we start to work through also like the ways that you might be avoiding your grief, whether that's a lot of sleep or exercise, food, alcohol, drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of talk about all these different ways that we typically avoid grief and why they're not helpful over time, right? It might be good for short term, but like long term, we really want to find something more valuable to you, more helpful to you. And then eventually we start talking about your relationship with your person, right? And we go deep into the relationship, all the major events that happen, the negative things that happen, the positive things that happen. A lot of times we'll either idolize or demonize somebody after they passed away, and they were either the worst person we've ever met or they were the most amazing person, right? And nobody's perfect, as much as we would like to think they are. Nobody's perfect, right? And no relationship is perfect. And so we really have to get honest about how everything went. And then from there, we talk about things that you want to forgive, things that you want to apologize for, and then things that still feel unsaid, left unsaid, or maybe you said them, but you don't feel like they landed, they weren't really heard. And so really working through that process, and at the end of it, you walk away with this robust amount of written material, a letter, and all the different steps that you've gone through the process. And with that, with the reading, with the writing, with the speaking of it, with the way that they have structured this program, again, I think there's a little bit of magic in there, because again, you walk away feeling lighter. You feel more at peace. You'll never fully be over your grief, right? But you can forgive yourself and you can forgive the other person. And I just found it to be, again, a little magical. There's something about it that I can't fully explain, but I've seen so many people go through this process and literally tell me, I never thought that I would, be able to say, I forgive myself, or I never thought that I'd be okay with the fact that my son passed away. Again, it's not like they're overjoyed about it, but they are able to accept it. They're able to not feel guilty. They are able to find the peace within that things went the way they want and happened the way they happened.
And it really sounds to me like almost like a very active mourning, to go through that process, because you're remembering them but then also processing your own grief. So it's like a very intentional process. Thank you so much for sharing more about that, because I think it's so helpful for people and for more people to know that it's out there and it's international. You can find it all over the world. And yet there's many trainings you can do online now as well.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And honestly, I recommended it to so many people, friends, family members, people that contact me randomly. I always recommend it as one of the first things to take a look at, and not everybody's ready for it, because like you said, it is intentional. It is a difficult process. I tell people it's simple, but it's not easy. Right. And it requires something of you. It requires the courage and the patience and the willingness to do the work, and so not everybody's ready for it. It may not be perfect or right for everybody. But it's definitely a resource worth checking out and exploring.
Yeah, and people can buy the book, which
Mhm.
is not, it's not like a massive book, it's a
No.
small handbook, and
Yeah,
you could do that in the privacy of your own home, without being in a group if you wanted to.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, you could do this absolutely by yourself. I don't usually recommend that because
No,
it is a
yeah.
challenging process, but it is absolutely something that people could just work through on their own if they really felt like they needed that, and that's what I love about it. And it's designed to be read by a griever, right? So it's short chapters and easy language, because they understand that you can't always focus, they understand that it's hard to pay attention, and because the work is so intense, you want to break it up. You don't want to try and do it all at once. So yeah, I think it's brilliant, the way it's structured and the way it's presented.
Mhm. And so we're grateful to your sister in that she introduced you to both of your careers. Um, Obviously, we wish that she was still here and that you don't have this second career, but I know that you share on your website how, and I very much relate to this, that her passing really made you think about like what is important in life, and what are the things that you don't want to put off till tomorrow, that you can do today. Perhaps you could speak more to that, and any other things that this very sad, difficult event has changed, how it has changed you and changed your view of life.
Oh my gosh. How has it not changed me and my view of life? Like um, in a way, I feel like I started a different life after she passed away. I certainly have some traits and qualities, characteristics, but I feel like I've become so much more patient and empathetic and communicative, really making sure that my family and my friends, my loved ones know how much I care, know how much I'd be there for them. I never liked the idea of going to bed angry with my husband, because I don't want to feel that regret. I don't want to feel that guilt. I don't want to feel that pain again, so there's definitely some fear in there, but also just a real drive, to make sure they know how important they are to me. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think I have a friend who is a life coach, and she calls herself a death conscious coach, which is really the idea that, we know that we're going to die. We know that our time here is limited. So what do you want to do? How do you want to live your life? What's most important to you? What are the things, the experiences that you want to have, the kinds of relationships you want to have? And I have been very intentional about my life since my sister passed away. I mean, I spent years working in theater, not really happy, but not knowing what else to do. And I did a lot of trainings and certifications and kind of exploring, took some classes. Should I do this? Should I do that? But it wasn't until after she passed away and I realized that, like, oh, my time is limited, and I do have the capacity to change, and I want to be happy. I really realized I was like, I'm not willing to spend any more of my time working in a career where I wasn't fulfilled, and so yeah, I mean, quite a bit of my life changed. I started traveling a lot more. I was able to I was willing to date, and to be vulnerable. And luckily, I found an amazing man, who I call my husband. And uh, yeah, I've worked through so much. And I actually just quite recently, because of some of the experiences I've had throughout COVID and becoming a mother and raising my child, I actually just finished some trauma work for myself with a therapist, some EMDR work, and it's been so valuable. So I feel like I have really started to, since she died, but probably in the few years after she died, when I finally started to heal and felt like I was able to forgive myself and sort of move forward. I've been much more intentional about my life and the kinds of experiences, the kinds of people I want to know and spend time with. I've eliminated a lot of negativity and drama, and healed a lot from, again, previous traumas and childhood issues. And it's just been, it's been a complete change from who I used to be and the kind of life and lifestyle that I had. It's very much more like, whatever, life will happen and I'm not happy, but that's okay, or that's normal, or that's to be expected. And now it's like, no, no, I don't want to suffer. No, I'm not willing to, to compromise, on certain things. And there's much more joy in my life and much more joy to be had out in the world. And I do very much feel like I'm living more in my purpose, in being able to support other people through their own grief journeys.
Yeah, quite right. And I can imagine you're a very grounded person to listen to and be with. So I imagine that you're a real blessing for all the people that you work with.
Thank you.
So welcome. While you were speaking, I was thinking about your daughter, because how old is she?
She's 2.
She's 2, so she's still the little thing. Do you tell her about her auntie? Yeah, that's not here on the physical
not
form.
Yet.
Not yet. It's a little young, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I was thinking about, are there ways that you honor your sister on her birthday or things like that, or carrying her memory forward in any way?
I try very, very hard to, especially on her birthday. She had a couple of charities that she really liked, and she was like me, she was a dog mom. And so I definitely like to donate every year. But also, just having pictures of her around. I talk about her with some friends a lot. My other sister and I talk about her quite a bit. And I believe, honestly, that what I'm doing in my work is honoring her, And honestly, that's why I got into coaching in the first place. And not even just grief coaching, but just coaching, because it is all about mindset. It is all about being able to question, that voice in your head and start to respond to that voice in your head that tells you you're not enough, or you can't do it, or it won't work, or whatever, negativity is spewed at you. And I really believe helping people achieve their goals, whether it's dealing with the grief that they've experienced, or wanting to be in a new relationship, wanting to have kids, wanting a new career, wanting to feel more successful in the career that they're already in, whatever it is for them. I feel like that's honoring her, and helping them live the best possible life they can, because she couldn't, or she didn't, and she couldn't always respond, question and respond that negative voice in her head. So my hope is that, in helping other people, in some way, I'm honoring her.
Absolutely, you are 100%. And talking more to your clients, do you tend to work with people on a long-term basis, or how do you if somebody wanted to get hold of you, for example, what do you suggest in terms of quantity of time working with you?
So it really depends. I've set it up so that the grief recovery work is about 2 months long. Some people find that that's enough. Some people find that that's absolutely not enough, and so I have different sort of programs that I can offer 2 months, 4 months, or beyond. I do have a number of clients that I've worked with. Either we started working together because of grief, or we've gotten into it after working together from general coaching. But I do have a number of clients that I've been working with literally for years. I think the oldest client, most long-term client I had was about 5 years. And I have another client that we're coming up on 3.5 years, another client that's 4 years, so I do have some long-term clients, and it really just depends on the person and what they've been through and what they're looking for. But I never try to make a sort of a across the board statement of like, this is how long it's going to take, you know what I mean? Because each person is so individual, and their experience is so unique. So, but I do have, different sort of packages that people could check out and see what works best for them. But they can visit my website, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, harborlightcoaching.com. Or I'm not very social or very active on social media these days, but on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, so people can check me out there as well.
Yes, and we'll put all of that under this interview. So fear not. And actually, this might be a good time to talk about the free gift that you'll give away, that we'll put a link to here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in an effort to help people who, like me, don't know where to turn when they've gone through a loss, I created a grief assessment. So it's absolutely free. It's on my website, and basically, it just takes you through a series of questions to kind of help you figure out where you are in your grief journey. Because you might need a therapist, a specialist. You might need a therapist who specializes in grief, and that would be, on one end of the spectrum. And then there's grief counseling, and then there's grief coaching. So it really kind of depends on where each person is in their loss, and I want to make sure that they get the right kind of support. Because again, I know how hard it is to make those phone calls, to make those appointments, to go into the office or get on a Zoom call to share, your story and walk through all of the loss that you've experienced. It takes courage. It takes effort, right? And when you're grieving, everything takes effort, right? Everything is so hard. So I want to make the process hopefully that much easier for people. So at least if you know that you need a counselor, okay, then let me call up these 3 counselors and see which one feels like a best fit. Or if I need a coach, okay, let me, start Googling and looking into different coaches that I could talk to, rather than, okay, I need a therapist and a counselor, or I'm going to see both. And then I'm going to, I want to help just make that process a little easier, a little smoother. So the grief assessment is available to anyone and everyone to be able to, hopefully help them figure out where they are, what they need most, and what each resource is intended to do. And also, there's a 31-day daily affirmation that people can sign up for. It's called Grief and Grace. And it basically is helping people understand and navigate grief. So they can always sign up for that as well. And that's totally free.
Amazing. I think that's, well, both of them sound wonderful, but especially the one that's, trying to ascertain whether you need a coach, a therapist, because it is a confusing thing for people to know what they need. And as you say, we're not in a position to have the energy or do the research. So this is why these series are so great, because people can get a real feeling for people like yourself around, whether they feel that they would be a fit or not for you. Now, my final question, which I like to ask people, is what it would be your interpretation of the term conscious grief?
I love that question. I think, to me, conscious grief is about intentional grief, right? Like being intentional about healing from your grief, about processing your grief. I think so many of us are taught from society, from childhood, from our parents, from all these different resources or all these different sources, to ignore or compartmentalize or avoid our grief. Anything that doesn't feel positive, we can't have it. Got to push it away. We should try to get out of it. You got to fix your grief, right? You get all these messages about you've been in grief too long. You're still not over that. You can just find someone else, just move on. We get all these different messages, that grieving is wrong or it's bad or it shouldn't take so long, or there's some sort of shame around being in grief. And I think conscious grieving is about giving yourself space and time doing the work to heal, you know, and being intentional about it, like not listening to those messages, not falling into that trap of feeling shame because you're feeling the way you feel, or, you know, making yourself wrong because you're grieving X amount of time. You know, I think there's something really precious about giving yourself that space and time to grieve. I think it's really necessary. And it's unfortunate that our society or societies don't really allow for that, you know, as much as we should. So yeah, I think conscious grieving really is about making that time, making that space, being intentional about how you want to go through grief.
Beautiful answer. Thank you, Nesreen. Thank you so very much for being here and for your time. It's been just a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. And I hope that everybody who's been listening has enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.